Hi folks, and welcome to Gotham City Knights video series. This video will be a Batman Miniatures Game 3rd Edition Battle Report. This is our second video, and once again, due to COVID-19, has been played on Tabletop Simulator. We here at Gotham City Knights seek to not just show you how our games play out, but give you insight to our strategic and tactical decision making throughout. My name is Caiaphas, and my opponent for this game is Salandra. And today we decided to show you a matchup between my favourite Batman leader, namely Batwoman, and the daughter of the demon, Talia al Ghul, in the League of Assassins. This should be an interesting suspect-driven game with sparks of combat throughout. So let's take a quick look at the crews here. First up is the Batman list, led by Batwoman, backed up by the Carrie Kelly Robin and the new Catwoman. These three are probably going to be the main focus of the list, probably soaking up most of the Audacity markers. We'll get into what they do whenever they come up, but basically the theme is that they are efficient. They whatever they do, they're going to be doing more than one thing per turn, per activation. They're then backed up by a number of cops, guards, and detectives, armed with pistols, beanbags, radios, and whistles. All again, just to allow me to have some freedom to use an Audacity to its full if it gets to assigned to any of these folks. So now we'll take a look at the crew's objective deck that I've built. I've not really fine-tuned this deck for the game against the League of Assassins, but this is what I've sort of settled on over a couple of games with this crew. The idea is to get out as many suspects as possible, obviously trying to get out the all-important snitch, keeping the cops in the right places for the wait for backup card, and then every turn having enough suspects on the borders that I can use the secure the perimeter card to drag two suspects away and hopefully have a suspect advantage for the stick to the plan card. The other part of the list is really looking to remove my opponent's suspect markers so they come through everything, and the Catwoman a cat has its needs cards are very important to score off those sort of actions as well. Finally, I've got the 3 copies of Get Them Off the Streets to not only control my opponent's resources that they want to play, but also to score big whenever Batwoman has a prey in mind. Next up, we take a look at the League of Assassins crew that Salandra will be playing. This one's led by Talia, the rebirth version of Talia. She brings extra funding and tricks all throughout the game. Then she's backed up by a number of different henchmen. Robin being the main unique character here. He and Talia obviously have that death pact. When one becomes casualty, the other one gets very, very angry. We've also got Killer Moth and Polka Dot Man. Killer Moth bringing his objective card, and Polka Dot Man bringing the new abilities to the table that make the list entirely much tankier, spreading that sort of defensive influence across the board. What I would say about Salandra's equipment, she's prioritized the ability to deploy a little deeper into the map with shadow training and trained in the shadows. So looking at the crew's objective deck now, generally League of Assassins is a bit of a misnomer. They're actually not that well set up to score points from assassination or killing other miniatures. There's maybe only 5 cards in the League of Assassins deck that actually give you a reward from doing so. Especially with Talia as the leader, we've always seen that it's better to try and maximize the suspect marker game. So that means taking Talia's character card, which is all about the resources, all about protecting your suspects, and the objective piece is about getting enough suspects around enemies. Taking the likes of the do not deviate from the plan, which is about making sure your opponents don't remove your suspects, eradicate the order, having the most in play, under their noses, placing suspects near your opponent's suspects. We cannot be defeated. That's where I was talking about suspect markers being in a specific orientation, close enough to each other. And the big one, multiple threats, where effectively at the start of activation, you would designate 6 of your suspect markers to potentially be scored off by the end of the turn. The rest of it fills out with Die Hard, Overdrive, valuable commodities, a Lazarus Pit for defense, The Fire Rises, which is again about controlling your opponent's suspect markers, and the Killer Moth character card. So here we are now in the game. The map we loaded in is a sort of abandoned mine in the top right, and a sort of freeway in the middle between a couple of fairly rundown, ramshackle businesses, cars, and dumpsters. So we then obviously rolled off to see who would place the lampposts and sewers first. As is the running joke between Salandra and I, Salandra seems to win these more than often, and she got to place the first lamppost. So overall, she looked to place the lampposts on the edges of the map. She'd seen my crew, seen all those beanbags that have unlimited range, and wanted to stay fairly clear of line of sight. I tried to sort of counter that by putting one in the middle of the field and one towards the north, just to cover certain areas where I thought she might try and sneak around. Sewers, again, same reason. Salandra has put them as wide away as possible to effectively sort of stop me being able to use them too heavily to get around things. I have played this map before by Salandra and had suffered from being deployed in the bottom corners, as there are two buildings right in the way of your progress right at the start. So I decided to put a couple of sewers down there just to jumpstart me if I needed it. Next, we randomized our scenario and our event. So first of all, the scenario was the taking side scenario. Once again, this is another one of the scenarios that Salandra and I have not actually played in the past, just from the random decks that we've played. So this effectively means that we're deploying side by side on one side of the map in a very shallow 4-inch deployment zone. The caveat here is that there is effectively an impassable wall down the middle of that deployment zone that stretches all the way into exactly halfway down the board. So it immediately sort of quadrants us in and causes us some issues in that sense. The event that we rolled up was Heavy Rain, which my heart sank immediately because at the start of each round, the player with the initiative must roll a d6 on a roll of a 4 up, all ranged attacks for all models. Roll one less dice until the end of the round. And we all know the best dice for any sort of ranged attack is usually the strength dice. So let's take a look at the map and see where this impassable line goes. It goes right down the middle. This is where Salandra decided that she was going to deploy, was at the north of the map. That was to basically, again, cut off access to sewers that would be useful and nearby. So this was the only orientation of the map that she could do that. She chose the left-hand side at the top, beside the building, and I was stuck on the right-hand side where the mining gear is. So here we have the scene after deployment. So let's look at the League of Assassins first. Around Talia, as an all-henchman crew, she's kept everyone within 8 inches. Robin is his undercover deployment just 8 inches away from Talia, so he's still benefiting from that Inspire whenever he begins his activation. And you have also got the League Acolyte with a bow deployed deep into the map beside the broken down bus, looking to use that bow to sort of threaten early on. Salandra did make mention that at this point she maybe had decided that she had chosen the wrong side of the wall, and so it was a little bit more cramped on her side for suspects because of the intervening building. But let's look at the Batman crew. So similarly, obviously, most of the henchmen are around Batwoman, gaining that Inspire to try and get those early suspect markers out. You have the one sidekick and the one free agent off to the far right. The Arkham Guard, who's undercover, Arkham Guard 3, again, still within 8, obviously, of the deployment zone, and within 8 of Batwoman, getting that Inspire. And deep in the map, right at the bottom, you've got the GCPD detective hiding behind a broken down van, hoping to take advantage of that forward position. So at this stage, I'm very happy to introduce our new feature that we've learned since the first game that we put up. We now have the ability to show you the hand of cards that each player has, and therefore you can sort of play along and figure out what you might have done instead of what we did. It also should hopefully make some sense now whenever we're talking about our plots that we chose to start the game with. So on the Batman side, I unfortunately drew a handful of duplicates and then mulliganed into a handful of duplicates. So I started the game with a non-lethal ammo and 2 Phase 4 cards, the Secure the Perimeter ones, which I don't mind having one because I'd like to score one of those early on in the game. But having 2 is a little bit of a limitation, especially since I won't really be able to cycle them as a resource because I don't want to be removing too many suspects in the first turn, and there is a great big dirty wall down the middle of the battlefield. The last card, obviously, is the key one for the Batman crew, always is a snitch. I felt a little bit happier having that in my hand. I knew I could put it out and pretty much guarantee scoring it this turn, and cross my fingers that I would draw something that might be helpful to keep things moving. So for this, then I decided that I was going to choose the VIP plot. The VIP plot is scored after you complete any objective, an extra protection objective. I didn't have a protection objective at this minute, but I have enough in my deck that I was sure I could get there. And the third piece is effectively the first suspect I put out on the board. It becomes a VIP marker instead of a suspect marker. And at the end of the turn, you check to see how many friendly models are around that VIP as compared to opponent's models. If you have more, then the VIP part of this plot card scores, and then that completes. So I thought that would be very easy to complete the third part of that, and then I could fill in the gaps later on. On the League of Assassins side, the League of Assassins had a fairly nicely mixed hand. They had the Die Hard card, which they would probably commit to in Phase 1, and then one Phase 4 card in the Do Not Deviate from the Plan, which is all to do with suspects not being removed in the turn. Very likely in this because we're so cut off from each other by the wall down the middle. The We Cannot Be Defeated is the having a number of suspect markers close enough to each other. Again, should be easy to set that up this turn. And the multiple threats, again, with all the inspires early in the game, all the henchmen very close, getting more than 6 suspect markers out in time to play multiple threats and pretty much guarantee it scoring was very likely. So for that reason, Salandra chose the Set Up the Purge plot as her starting plot. So within that, it's just the normal complete an objective, complete a control objective, of which there were a couple in her hand already. And then the last one at the end of a round, no enemy model can see 2 of your suspects. So whenever you think about the big dirty wall down the middle of the field that can't be seen through, that was always going to be very, very easy for Salandra to achieve. So here we jump into round 1. The initiative roll was taken and won by Salandra, as is the way of things. She decided to pass the initiative to me. So I was the first player for the first round. This is probably to allow me to make the move first and her to react in time. So this is the point that we now rolled for the heavy rain effect, and the rain is tipping it down not only in the Tabletop Simulator mod, but actually in the game as well. So any ranged attacks would lose one of their attack dice. So Phase 1, Salandra played the Die Hard objective card from her hand as we predicted. Played it on Damian Wayne, so if Damian Wayne is alive at the end of the turn, she'll score those 2 points. Then we moved on to the Raise the Plan phase. As I was the first player with the initiative, the Batman crew had to put out their Audacity first. So I put the Audacity onto Batwoman, Arkham Guard 3, Catwoman, and the GCBD Detective. My objective this turn is to get as many suspects out as possible to set up the Secure the Perimeter in my hand. I want to get that snitch on the board quickly so that I can cycle through cards. And I really wanted to play with the mechanics that the Catwoman had, so I wanted to see what she could do with an Audacity marker. Batwoman's is kind of there just in case anyone decides to be a little bold and come around the edge of the wall so that she can threaten them with the remote control batarangs. On the League of Assassins side, the Audacity markers are on Talia, Killer Moth, Damien, and the forward deployed League Acolyte 4, the one with the bow. League Acolyte 4 effectively, he's just wanting to sort of control where I am with that bow, threaten. He can also obviously use that to place a suspect. Damien, he's in inspire range at the minute, so with his detective, he can place out 2 without even having to move. Talia can also use an order on him to have a third one placed, so there's a lot of flexibility in his activation this turn. Talia, as I said, has that order ability, which is important, that special ability. Everyone else in that crew has inspire around there, so they didn't really need the audacity. And Killer Moth has that flexibility of using his Bat Claw on turn 1. So again, that gives him the opportunity to get further up the map. So just at the end of the Raise the Plan phase, Talia used her manipulative trait to try and force one of my miniatures to be the last one to activate. Shouldn't be all that important this turn, but I guess it was looking to mess with my sequencing. She chose Catwoman. Catwoman passed the roll, so she was able to activate in any order she wanted. So over to my first activation, I activated the Arkham Guard. So the Arkham Guard had Audacity and had Radio, so it was within Inspire range of Batwoman. So he was able to put down a suspect where he started. That suspect, because of my plot, became the VIP marker, so it's no longer a suspect. The VIP marker, as part of my plot, will score if I have more people around at the end of the turn than my opponent. He then left that VIP sitting in the rain on its own and moved forward to the edge of the board and placed down his own suspect with his tactical action from his Audacity counter. That suspect became a snitch as I played the snitch objective card out. And then I redrew a new card. And as you can see, I now have all 3 copies of Secure the Perimeter in my hand, which is very useful for actually getting anything done this turn. So the first activation for the League of Assassins was a lowly League Acolyte, the one carrying the scimitar over his head. He didn't do a whole lot. With his Inspire, he moved forward about 2 inches and dropped a suspect marker at the first legal point that he could. Really looking to use as much of the space in between that building and the wall as possible, as it is a little crushed. At the same time, Salandra was able to commit to an objective card. We will not be defeated, so that's the one where you have to set up 3 suspect markers within 6 inches of each other, and that's checked at the end of the turn. She was then able to draw a Under Their Noses from the deck. So over to the Batman crew again, and the other Arkham Guard strode forward this time, again using his Inspire to move and place a suspect. Really hugging this board edge to try and keep distance from the League of Assassins, and also being within 4 inches of the VIP marker didn't hurt. So that's a second suspect out, exactly 4 inches away from the other, along the board edge. No cards to play from hand, as you can see, 3 copies of Secure the Perimeter and 1 copy of non-lethal ammo. Not much that I could do to cycle through either, unfortunately. So next up was the Bow Acolyte in the middle of the board. Originally, Slander had thought about using that bow, but with the strength dice being removed by the rain and any further dice being able to be removed from moving and shooting, she really thought better of it. Decided to move behind the bus and place the suspect marker down just to keep that progress on the amount of suspects out on the board. No cards to play at this point. None to cycle through either for her resources. Carrie Kelly was next to activate on the good guy side. Carrie Kelly is my favourite thorn in the side. She didn't have an Audacity token this turn, but she has the Handyman trait, which allows her a free manipulate action per turn. So she just used the length of her movement to sort of start pressing the League from this perspective. I was looking to get round the corner and start to remove their suspects as soon as I get my maximum ones out. So, and Carrie's fairly survivable. Unfortunately, again, couldn't play any objective cards, but continued to set up the next turn. Continuing to build her bastion of suspect markers on her side of the wall, Salandra activated Assassin 4 with Inspire, moved him forward and popped down a suspect marker. This suspect marker was within 4 inches of the one that I had just fed her, unbeknownst, and on the other side of the wall. Now, we went back and forth about this and thought about it. Even though you can't draw a line of sight through the wall, we ruled that we could score this card based on the fact that the card does not say anything about having to have line of sight or impassable terrain affecting it. Salandra then drew the Overdrive card and played it immediately as a free resource to pop out a Venom dose beside League Acolyte 4, cycling through her deck, and then was able to also then draw the Call an Ambulance card. Over on the thin blue side of the line, Agent 2, the cheapest cop going, activated and put down one of the most suspicious looking suspects hidden behind a wall between another wall, but that's all he could do on his turn. So at this point, Polka Dot Man moves up from the deployment zone to just to the edge of the building, places down a suspect, and plays a resource, which is the Call an Ambulance resource, to place a medical supplies marker. Polka Dot Man has just been spoiled by night. Pre-orders are up currently, probably released in about 2 weeks. But his kit is basically all about spreading protection across the crew. He has sort of a radius in which he can reduce attacks incoming to anybody in that. He's really tanky himself because he has some power armor, and he has abilities that allow him to take extra efforts to reduce damage to himself, to others, and he also can recover more stun damage, or actually blood damage, at the end of the turn through his auto repair trait. Really tanky, makes everyone else around him really tanky, and something I had to look out for the entire game. I was very wary always of moving my bodyguards at the right time. So Merkel now came forward, left enough space around him for the suspect markers that I wanted to put out from everybody else, and popped his own suspect marker out behind him. Merkel is key to keeping Batwoman up if anything big comes in, so it left a space in front of him to use that bodyguard if needed. So back over to League of Assassins, and it is Acolyte 2 that activates. Acolyte 2 gets to use the fact that I have once again dropped a suspect far too close to the League of Assassins, playing the multiple threats as a resource. Because he's within 4 inches of a enemy suspect, he can add 4 inches to his basic move distance. That gives him the range to get onto the other side of the shack and place down another suspect, so that leaves space for all the rest to get placed in time. So at this point, I have activated Catwoman and moved her forward. This is the new Catwoman, as we discussed in the crew review piece. The main trick that this new Catwoman has is whenever she places a suspect marker, it can also be a cat marker. So what are cat markers, you might say? Well, there's a number of different uses the cat markers have, and let me go through them. So first things first, cat marker, as I said, is still a suspect marker, so it can count towards your suspects. The second thing is whenever Catwoman receives enough damage to KO or casualty her during an enemy's activation, she can instead cancel that attack and basically teleport to one of the cat markers is. The second thing is that once per activation, she can remove a cat marker from the board to reveal a enemy suspect marker within 8 inches of that cat marker. And the third piece is that at the start of her movement, she can also teleport to a cat marker anywhere on the board, then removing said cat marker. So it just gives her a lot of flexibility. It gives her the ability, along with the backpack and potentially her normal tactical action, to remove 3 suspects from the board in 1 turn. So in this turn, what I've done is moved her up towards the edge of the wall as much as possible, placed a suspect marker, which turned into a cat marker, and then with her Sneaking Cats ability, which basically allows her to do a mini hacking on cat markers on the board, I moved the cat marker back towards my deployment zone, which hopefully will serve as a save point or a restore point if she does take any damage in any stage. So with the Sneaking Cats ability, if any cat marker finishes within 4 inches of Catwoman, you basically get to move 2 inches for each cat marker that does so. So I've sort of pushed her forward another 2 inches. And then hopefully at the end of the turn, during the recount phase, she'll use the sneaking trait to move yet another 2 inches. So she's really, really maneuverable, as you would expect, and really, really thematic. So Killer Moth takes his activation next on the League of Assassins side. Um, Salandra admitted to me after the fact that she probably did group her entire crew a little too closely, especially with Killer Moth having a radio. She was forced to use her Batclaw to move Killer Moth over to the other side of the building to get that sort of spacing to get another suspect marker out. And that was all he was able to achieve. Next up, on the Batman side, it was the GCPD detective who had deployed deep into the map to activate next. I was holding this activation as long as I possibly could to see if Damien was going to make a move before I did. Unfortunately, not so. So I placed out two suspects from where I started behind the van, 1 3 inches southwest and 1 3 inches southeast of him, and then used the rest of his turn to move to a new position so he could place some more out next turn. Like this activation on the League of Assassins side shows exactly the problems that Salandra had with the deployment, but she fought through it anyway. Start of her activation, because she had 6 suspects out on the board, Talia activated and she played multiple threats. We didn't put any counters out on them because it didn't look... I only had Batwoman left to activate and there was no way I was going to be able to remove or reveal any suspects. So we were pretty certain that it was going to score. She then drew into her hand a copy of Valuable Commodities, which I'm sure will turn up in a later activation. Unfortunately, Talia didn't have anything she could really do other than move up with her full 11 inches to sort of keep that Inspire range on all of the henchmen around her. So the last activation for the Batman crew was Batwoman herself. I chose not to use her Batclaw to sort of overextend herself. Brought her up following the other 2 ladies in the crew. Didn't really have much else to do with my Audacity marker. It felt a little wasted, but she's a really tanky boss with that bat armor. She's got really good ranged weapon through the remote control medium range batarangs. She has lots of bonuses to attacking people if she either falls or uses a Batclaw before she does so. She's got the access to arrest herself, which gives her an edge, in my opinion, over some of the Batmen that exist, because they don't have an ability to take folks off the playing field and score that get them off the streets card, which is so important to the Batman crew. She also actually gives out passive actions whenever she does attack in melee, allowing another friendly model, or herself actually, to place a suspect or take a free move of 4 inches. And anyone else who also melee attacks anyone that she's in base contact with, she get a +1 bonus to their attack skill. So overall, she's my favourite Batman crew leader at this point, and hopefully we'll see what she can do later on in this game. Then, on the other side, Damien activated, and after some long thinking and measuring, Salandra had the Under Their Noses card in her hand, and she was desperate to get it played and score those early points and get a nice early lead. Robin, with his Inspire, Batclaw, and Audacity, flew across the battlefield the full 17 inches, was able to use his detective to place a suspect out in front of him, which was then within 4 inches of the suspect marker, tucked up right against the board edge near the GCPD cop. That scored Under Their Noses, and Salandra drew out the Eradicate the Order card. She then used her actual tactical action to place the other suspect out at a right angle to where Damien is compared to the other suspect. Unfortunately, the Eradicate the Order would stick in her hand because we are now tied at 8 suspects apiece, and that was the last activation of the round. So then we moved on to phase 4, the recount phase of the first round. For once, we actually had a trait to be activated during the first part of that. Catwoman sneaking allowed her to move an extra 2 inches forward, again sneaking towards that midpoint of the board to start threatening the League of Assassins crew and their suspect markers. Then we move on to what scored this round. So just before we start that, I want to clarify something. We had sought clarification on the rule of how things are scored in the recount phase. to do with the amount of suspect markers out and how that can change through different effects throughout that phase. The idea is that the board state is frozen once the recount phase begins. So any suspect markers that are removed, added, changed, whatever, during that phase do not count towards any objectives or plots that you might have wanted to score. So in that vein, first up was the Batman objectives. So the snitch that was on the eastern side of the board scored because there were no enemies within 4 inches of it. And I played Secure the Perimeter from hand. Secure the Perimeter meant I had to remove 2 suspect markers, so I removed one of the others near the board edge at the east and one towards the south near the GCPD detective. It got tucked under my plot because it was an objective. The plot itself, the VIP marker, I had more friendlies near it than enemies, so the third part of the plot was fulfilled. I now just need a protection objective to complete that plot entirely. Snitch scored me 3 points. Secure the Perimeter would soon score me another 2 points. So now over to the League of Assassins scoring. So as I explained, the Eradicate the Order could not score because both crews had 8 suspect markers out at the start of the recount phase, even though the count is now 8-6. The Die Hard card on Damien, because he's still standing, scored. Multiple threats on the 6 identified suspect marker scores. We already had 2 under their noses scored during the turn. The We Cannot Be Defeated. So if you look at the shack towards the sort of north of the board, there are 3 suspects that are all within 6 inches of each other, so it was able to score. They do not deviate from the plan. The Batman crew did not reveal any suspects from the League of Assassins crew, so that was also able to score. So a lot of early scoring, and the plot itself, the setup, the purge, the requisite objectives were scored, and at the end of the round there were more than 2 suspects that none of the Batman crew could see. So it also cleared and put Salandra in a very heavy 13-3 lead at the start of the first round. At the end of round 1, both Salandra and myself took the opportunity to refill our hands and discard a card from our hand to draw another. My hand ended up, as you can see, with the Secure the Perimeter left that I'd like to aim towards at the end of the turn. And I have now 2 copies of Come Through Everything, along with the non-lethal ammo sitting there from before. Salandra has the Valuable Commodities, another Do Not Deviate from the Plan, Talia's character card, and the final Under Their Noses. So we moved on to round 2, and the roll-off for the initiative was won by Batwoman, which was very key for them. We also rolled for the heavy rain, and it was continuing to rain down, so ranged attacks were still going to suffer in this weather. So Audacity went down, and it went down on Batwoman, Catwoman, Carrie Kelly, and the GCPD detective towards the south of the board. On the League of Assassins side, Salandra reacted by putting it on Damien, Talia, the Acolyte with the bow, and the Acolyte with the knives. At the end of the Raise the Plan phase, she also was able to scheme a couple of my suspect markers around. You can see the one at the bottom of the board, the GCPD detective had placed, had been moved towards, away from the edge of the board. My cat marker had been moved further away from Catwoman, and one of her own markers was moved just to create some space. She also tried to manipulate the GCPD detective to activate last, but unfortunately failed as he passed his willpower roll. The Batwoman got things started very quickly in the second round, taking advantage of the fact that Damien had moved out of the range of Polka Dot Man to try and remove an activation, and a key activation at that, from the League of Assassins side. She used her Batclaw to get 16 inches of movement to move into base-to-base with Robin, which activated her aerial assault and her military teamwork traits, giving her +1 to hit and critting on a 4. So she took those shock gloves and absolutely pummeled per Damian Wayne, who was then knocked out. Unfortunately, she had already used her special to use the Batclaw to get there, so she wasn't able to arrest Damian, and she didn't have any cards in her hand that would affect. However, because she got 2 successful hits in combat, she was able to instruct Catwoman to pop down a suspect marker. Catwoman obviously popped down a suspect marker, which was in fact also a cat. So just to clarify what it said in the raise the plan phase, it was actually the suspect marker nearest Assassin 4 that Talia had used her last scheming on. That was hopefully in order to set up a position where Salandra could fulfill the part of her plot where she had 2 assassins within 2 inches of the same suspect marker. So Assassin 4 was the next one to activate. Moving quickly on after the loss of Damian to the knockout from Batwoman, he used his Inspire from Talia to reveal his own suspect, and then actually used his own action to replace it, playing yet another under the noses through the impassable wall. So that scored another 2 quick points under the plot. And then the Talia character card resource was used, which basically has changed all of the suspects within 20, all of her suspects within 20 inches of her to a specific type of suspect. They're called a imminent threat marker, which means if I go to remove any of them, I first have to remove one of my own suspects. So it gives me a cost to reveal things beyond just an action, and Salandra could keep some parity in the suspect marker game. So over to the second activation for the Batman crew this turn. Again, I really wanted to get the full use out of Catwoman this game, so this was sort of the big activation that I had loaded up to start rolling through the cards in my deck. Catwoman moved away from the cat marker that had just been placed over to where the unconscious body of Damian and the very conscious body of Batwoman were standing. She was then able to place down her own suspect marker, again becoming a cat marker. She revealed the suspect marker that Robin had placed beside the bus. So because we just talked about it, because of the Talia imminent threat markers, I had to remove a suspect beside Agent 2, so that comes off the board. I was able to score Comb Through Everything, which was a protection objective, which then completed the VIP plot. So I then was able to score the Secure the Perimeter that was stuck under there as well. We drew my next plot card, which was the Point the Finger card, which immediately I looked at and wondered why I even considered taking it in this matchup, because it was reliant on me knocking out or making a casualty of one of Salandra's models close enough to my objective, my deployment zone, which wasn't likely to happen. I then continued to use Catwoman's abilities by moving the cat marker that I just placed far enough that it was close enough to the suspect marker that League Acolyte had placed out, and used the once per turn you can remove a cat marker to also reveal a suspect within 8 inches of that cat marker. Again, because it was a reveal, I had to remove one of my own, so I removed the one beside Carrie Kelly. So effectively, I've taken a hit at Salandra's suspects, but also lost 3 in the process. I was pretty certain I could replace those, so I thought it was a good gain, and I got to cycle through my deck a little. So Killer Moth was next to activate on the side of the League of Assassins. That meant due to his radio, he was able to reveal the suspect that he'd placed the turn before and immediately play valuable commodities, which he stowed the loot away in his backpack, hopefully to keep that for the rest of the game. He then popped down a suspect marker with his actual own action. Not much, but it did matter in the game. Next up was the scimitar-wielding Acolyte on the League of Assassins side. His original intention was to get near the suspect mark that was on the other side of the impassable wall, but inadvertently I had foiled that with my own machinations. so it looked like less of a turn for League Acolyte 1. He sort of came forward as far as possible, couldn't actually find a spot where he had enough room to place out a suspect, so that was the end of his activation. At this point, I activated Carrie Kelly, who, with her audacity and her handyman ability, were able to pop down a suspect before she moved in the spot that I'd removed one previously. Skirted around the truck in the middle of the board, using her maximum movement to get to a point where she could be safe. She then aimed her slingshot at Damien, who's on the ground, KO'd and whistled at, and was only able to obviously fire 2 shots because of the rain. But because the slingshot is handy, I was able to get 1 hit through, which was 1 blood. Normally going up to 2 blood because he's KO'd, but I played the non-lethal ammo, which converted that all to stun. Now, we ruled that because this had all been converted back to stun, even though he was KO'd, this was just ignored. Before she ended her activation, she popped the concealment special ability just to keep her safe of anything else incoming in the turn. Next up, the bow acolyte in the middle of the board activated. He picked up the venom container that was beside the suspect marker he had out there previously, that Catwoman had just removed. He popped a suspect marker with his tactical action after considering once again using the bow, but again, the heavy rain and having to move before you shoot was going to really cost him and not actually able to actually damage or hit anyone. They moved beside the cop car and tried to play the Moth signal resource to move Mothman around and to really cycle through Salandra's hand. Salandra had said that at this point her hand was getting very stuck and jammed up. She wasn't scoring anything this turn, and she'd seen the cop's score sort of slowly creeping towards her, so she wanted to get through this card. Even though she probably wanted it more for next turn, she just wanted to see if she could get anything else out. Similarly, my hand was a little stuck, so I decided to cancel the resource with Get Them Off the Streets to not only stop the effect, but also to cycle through the cards in my hand. Unfortunately, I drew yet another Secure the Perimeter. The game was obviously laughing at both of us at this point. So Agent 2, with his pepper spray towards the center of the wall, was next to activate. He popped down a suspect marker in the exact same spot that one previously, and immediately used the Secure the Perimeter resource card to get it out of my hand, to try and cycle through the deck, and also to take a joking poke at the assassin on the other side of the wall in revenge for all the under their noses. So the Secure the Perimeter resource allows me to remove a friendly suspect marker within 4 inches of an enemy model to perform a ranged attack against that model with the following profile: rate of fire 1, firearm, and blood stun damage. So heavy rain once again really negated this, and I think I rolled a 1 on the dice, so no damage was done to the assassin. But the good news was I was able to draw a snitch marker, which I would hopefully get played somewhere later in the turn. So Polka Dot Man was next to activate. He didn't have a whole lot to do, just moving forward away from his glorious medical supplies, so I felt happier about that. He just on the other side of the wall, moving his sort of bubble of protection up with the rest of the crew. Salandra tried to cycle through her deck by playing the free resource Eradicate the Order, making one of her models immune to smoke, even though there's no smoke effects on the entire board. But unfortunately, the deck laughed at her and she redrew another Eradicate the Order. So I went next with an Arkham Guard that was hugging the side of the board, the one with the beanbag gun, who had a radio. So he had a free manipulate to pop down a suspect marker. And then he looked across the street and saw the, again, unconscious body of Damian Wayne surrounded by Catwoman and Batwoman, and decided that he would raise his beanbag gun and take a pot shot from all the way across the board. The lamppost nearby, unfortunately, highlighting Damien's prone corpse at this point, effectively. The beanbag did hit, and once again, I was able to score non-lethal ammo because we converted all the damage to stun. That would have been that extra blood damage caused by the fact that Damien was knocked out. So unlike the Batman crew, Talia hung back in the turn and is activating pretty much second last in her crew, waiting to see what had happened. So immediately she used the Eradicate the Order resource again to make one of her crew immune to smoke, just to cycle through her deck. She was able to draw then the Overdrive card into her hand. She then looked across the other side of that cop car and told the Acolyte to drop a suspect marker with her Order special ability. She tried to set up what she was doing next turn by coming to the other side of the wall, trying to threaten the police's suspect markers and their more vulnerable cops on the other side, while also popping down the 8th suspect marker of her crew. The Arkham Guard 1 activated next. He popped down a suspect marker towards the side of the board, which he immediately played the Snitch card to set up that to score at the end of the turn. Unfortunately, my hand started to fill with more Phase 4 cards that I couldn't score, with 2 copies of Stick to the Plan, as we expected there to be 8 of each crew's suspect markers out. The last activation of the round for the League of Assassins was the Knife Acolyte, League Acolyte 2. He just popped around the other side of the wall to support Talia, played the Overdrive card as a resource, putting another Venom container out on the board just in front of Talia, and again setting up the threat on the cops for the next turn. Unfortunately, Salandra was looking for better cards to come out of her deck, but she drew another Do Not Deviate from the Plan, which she wouldn't be able to score this turn because Catwoman had removed some of the league's suspect markers. As this was the last league activation, I was sort of looking forward to next turn because Talia and the Acolyte were both out of line of sight of Polka Dot Man, and it would be important who would get the roll off the next turn. Last to go was Merkel in the Batman crew. Merkel didn't really have much to do. He didn't have audacity, so he just took aim with his beanbag gun and shot the Knife Acolyte. Now, because of the rain and because of the cover afforded by the shack, this was only a long shot and unfortunately entirely missed the League Acolyte 2. So, start of the recount phase, Catwoman again performed a little sneaking to sort of gain an extra little bit of ground. And then we move on to the scoring for the round. The Batman crew caught up significantly this turn, aided by the plot actually completing, the VIP plot completing, so that released the Secure the Perimeter and the Come Through Everything to score. I was able to score yet another Secure the Perimeter at the end of the round, removing 2 suspects, one near the GCPD detective and one near Arkham Guard 3. The snitch that was beside Arkham Guard 1 scored, and of course the non-lethal ammo shooting at Robin was scored this turn as well. I had 2 cards stuck under my plot at this point, and I was pretty much waving goodbye to them as I didn't think I was going to be able to complete the 3rd line of the plot. On Salandra's side, the plot was actually causing her issues because she couldn't get close enough to my suspects with 2 of her assassins. She did have the Under Their Noses stuck under that currently. Didn't score any other points this turn, but obviously had the valuable commodities in play on Killer Moth, which is a tasty 3 points waiting to score at the end of the game. So that left the scores at the end of round 2 as 14 to Batman, 13 to the League of Assassins, swinging the lead in the favour of the boys and girls in blue. Now we're taking a look at our hands at the start of round 3. Batman crew were able to get another Come Through Everything in their hand, along with the Wait for Backup, the Arrest, Get Them Off the Streets waiting to be played, and Stick to the Plan was probably one I wasn't going to be able to achieve this game unless something special happened. On the league side, you have another Do Not Deviate from the Plan, the Fire Rises, the Lazarus Pit, and the Multiple Threats, which is what Salandra really was sifting through her deck to get last turn. We rolled for initiative, and this time, eventually, the League of Assassins got the first activation. And then, of course, we rolled for the rain, and it continued to chuck it down in Gotham. So shooting was again going to be at a premium. The audacity for the League of Assassins went out onto the Newly woken up Damien, because of Talia's mind control substance, he immediately woke up and saved himself a single stun damage. Polka Dot Man had another audacity. Talia and the Knife Acolyte had the rest. So Damien obviously looking to get an activation in before he was able to be removed from the table. Audacity on the Batman side went to Arkham Guard 1, Batwoman, Catwoman, and Carrie Kelly. Just before the end of the raise plan phase, Talia obviously used her scheming and her manipulative. She schemed some suspects over to where Merkel was, moving one cat marker towards her, one cat marker away from her, and one just to surround Merkel. Tried to manipulate Carrie Kelly to move or to activate last, but once again failed. In an attempt to get a second activation for the game out of Damien before he potentially got wiped off the map, Delandra did activate the Boy Wonder. He decided that the GCPD detective was definitely irritating him, popped away from Batwoman off the floor, run over to the detective and took an almighty swing to try and take him out. Unfortunately, because he was attacking with his katanas and the detective was able to effort 3 times, the amount of attack dice that Damien was rolling were not really enough to get past the detective, and he only suffered 2 blood from the strength dice, which was unblockable. Damien did play multiple threats at the start of his activation, though, getting that card onto the board, and we marked the suspect counters with dice to show the numbers involved. So now that Damien had activated, I was not in any hurry to try and get him arrested. So it gave me the ability to activate Catwoman now and start affecting the amount of suspects that were on the board. So Catwoman moved around to the edge of the bus, which was beside one of the League suspect markers. She used her backpack free reveal to try and reveal it, but that was blocked by Salandra playing the resource on Do Not Deviate from the Plan. Catwoman then used her actual tactical action to reveal that suspect and score comb through everything. And then drew up a new card, which I drew the 3rd copy of Secure the Perimeter that I have not yet scored. I then used the Meow rule to remove the cat marker that was next to Talia, to remove it and the suspect that was right beside Talia, again, reducing the amount of counters on the League side. Next up, Talia took the opportunity to reduce the amount of activations on the Batman side by picking on poor little Merkel in the middle of the board. She charged in and attacked him. Unfortunately, Merkel was just not able to defend himself, even with rolling the extra dice for the VIP plot. There were no cards played here, but I think it just made Salandra happy to actually assassinate someone with one of the League of Assassins. So the GCPD detective now activated towards the bottom of the board. He didn't even really pay much heed to Robin, who had slashed at him earlier in the turn, playing 2 suspect markers out, one with his manipulate and one with his inspire free manipulate. Then he played the wait for backup card, which was played by anyone who's a cop. Choose a board edge and roll 1d6. Place a number counter with a value equal to the roll on the chosen cop's character card. After every activation following this, you reduce it by 1. And when it reaches 0, that model has to be within 4 inches of the chosen board edge and not KO or casualty. So he was pretty much untouchable at this point from anyone in the League crew. So even though I rolled a 5, which turned it up to a 6, this was going to tick down over the rest of the turn. Following Talia into battle, League Acolyte 2 charged into the middle of the Batman quadrant. He revealed a suspect which was previously beside Merkel, and because that was within 6 inches of his boss, he was able to score the Fire Rises objective card, which tucked neatly under the plot card. He also popped a multiple threats as a resource, paying the 1 resource point to add 4 to his basic movement distance. Salandra has done this in this case just to continue to cycle through her deck. She then took aim at the Arkham Guard on the board edge with her throwing knives, with her tactical action, and unfortunately was only able to do 1 single blood damage to the Arkham Guard. this point, it was time for Batwoman to put down little Damien. Talia had already activated this turn, so removing Damien at this point wasn't as scary because it only left Talia with one turn with the extra attack and willpower from the True Love trait. So Batwoman came in, attacked little Damien with her shock gloves, was able again to put enough stun into him, regardless of the amount of efforts and defense dice that he was rolling, to knock him out. And this time, because she'd only walked over, she was able to use her special to arrest him. While arresting him, she played the Get Them Off the Streets card for 3 points. And she also, because she had caused 2 hits in melee, she was able to instruct Catwoman to pop out a suspect marker, which again became a cat marker. All in all, pretty good activation, but it may have left Batwoman a little bit far away from the rest of the League crew to affect turn 4. Backing up the rest of his crew on the other side of the wall, Polka Dot Man now barreled across, looking to cast that radius of defense on Talia and the Acolyte 2. He also picked out the lonely beanbag guard across from him to fire his discs at and caused the maximum amount of damage, which was 4 blood, leaving the Arkham Guard on 1 health. If it hadn't been raining, he might not have been long for this world. Salandra then followed that up by playing the Eradicate the Order card just to continue cycling through her deck. That was as a resource. Carrie Kelly was next to activate from the middle of the board just beside the truck. She bounded over to the other side of the wall to in front of the League Acolyte 1. She then used her handyman ability to remove the suspect marker that was in front of him. That suspect marker was one of Talia's imminent threat markers, so one of the Batman ones had to come off the board as well, which was fine. Then she shot her weapon at League Acolyte 1, but unfortunately, while only being 2 inches away from his face, missed with both shots. With the bow Acolyte right near to her, she thought best of using the concealment trait to make sure that she couldn't have anyone shoot her, and that was the end of her activation. Next up was, in fact, that League Acolyte that's just 2 inches away from Carrie Kelly. He responded in kind by just popping down a suspect marker that had just been lifted. This one, not in base-to-base contact with Carrie, just to prevent her being able to remove it before moving off. He then played a resource card, the Overdrive card, I think for the 3rd time now. It was played, and the Venom container was popped beside Killer Moth on the west side of the board. Pepper Spray Agent 2 now activates. He just pops down a suspect marker in the same place that he's been hiding it all game. Next up is the bow-wielding Acolyte, who's beside the police car. He activated, didn't have Audacity, so the one thing that Salandra wanted to achieve with him was getting to somewhere where next turn she could score the card where 2 of her assassins are near the same suspect marker, so he sort of charged to the other side of the wall. And again, to try and cycle through her deck, she played the Call an Ambulance as a resource, place another med kit out on the board. Arkham Guard 3 was up next, having learned his lesson from the Polka Dot Man discs. Chased away to the other side of the truck, also used his radio to get his Inspire from Batwoman to place down a suspect marker, which becomes a snitch. I was then able to draw the Catwoman character card. A cat has its needs. For a miniature that didn't have an Audacity counter, this activation of Assassin 4 took a long time for us. Salandra was trying to make sure that she had the maximum amount of suspects out so that she could ensure that I couldn't score my stick to the plan cards. Assassin 4 just had the range to move to a certain spot, which is exactly 4 from multiple suspects. We measured it for a good 5 minutes, but it just about fit where it is, just slightly south of the main building on the map. And then she also played the We Cannot Be Defeated objective card to do with the orientation of 3 suspects, and also played the Eradicate the Order as a resource just to continue cycling through her deck. At this point, Arkham Guard 1 activates with the baton. I did consider running in to try and take out League Acolyte 2, knocking him out within 8 inches of my deployment zone, which would have scored the last part of my plot. But then I thought that the other 2 plot cards I have were pretty hard to achieve next turn. So I did not think that it was a good idea at this point because I actually might lose more points under the next plot. Instead, I did the cowardly thing and ran away to the south, popping out my 8th suspect marker just south of the sewer and lamppost. I had played the stick to the plan card as a resource to remove a suspect to give myself some more distance to get as far away as I possibly could. Killer Moth was last to activate in the round, and thinking about that valuable commodities that Salandra had stored on it, she decided that once again cowardice was the better part of valor. Took a backward step towards her own deployment zone and placed out her 8th suspect. She also played the Eradicate the Order as a resource once again, trying to cycle through. At this point was able to pick up the Talia, Daughter of the Demon card out of her deck. Once again, Catwoman used her sneaking trait to gain some ground on the League as they retreated into their suspects. And then we move on to scoring. The League didn't put a lot of points out into their total this turn, scoring We Cannot Be Defeated and Multiple Threats. Multiple Threats was dicey for the first time in the game. 2/3 chance, but Salandra came up good on that one. She got a little bit worried at this point because she wasn't scoring a lot of points, but she did have points scored in places that she would be able to get them. So valuable commodities, Killer Moth pretty much defended over in the corner, and the plot had another 4 points under it, which looked to be achievable in the next round. Over to the Batman side. Batman side also had 4 points stuck under the plot already, but with a plot that is probably not going to be achieved. They did score the wait for backup and get them off the streets during the turn, along with a come through everything. The snitch scored at the end of the turn, and once again they were able to remove 2 suspects on the perimeter to score secure the perimeter. This left the score at the end of the round as 26-18 in favour of the Batwoman crew, but it was all to play for in the final round. So the final round came up, and we once again rolled for initiative. This time the Batwoman crew winning the initiative roll, much to Salandra's chagrin. At this point, not very many cards left in the Batwoman deck, so the variety is very limited. So you see 2 Get Them Off the Streets, a Die Hard, and a Catwoman character card. The League had the Moth Signal, the Talia character card, Lazarus Pit, Multiple Threats. So scoring opportunities were more limited on the Batwoman side, but we'd see how they fared. Once again, for the 4th turn running, in the most unlikely of coin tosses, the rain continued to pour down and affect all of the ranged attacks on the board. Audacity on the Batwoman side went to Batwoman, Robin, Catwoman, and Arkham Guard 3. On the League of Assassins side, obviously Talia started playing tricks with their scheming, moving some suspects into positions that she thought she could benefit from the plot card that she had pending, as well as moving Catwoman's cat marker as far into the corner as she possibly could. Both crews then played a Phase 1 card. The Batwoman crew playing Die Hard on Catwoman, and the League of Assassins crew playing the Moth Signal on the ore truck right in the middle of the Batman quadrant. At this point, I activated Catwoman, and she moved again around the side of the bus over to the police car. She popped out a cat and used the sneaking cat special to drag the other one from behind the bus to just over where she was. She then revealed the suspect market that she was in base-to-base contact with and was able to score her character card, which is a cat has its needs, reveal an enemy suspect within 5 inches of at least 2 friendly cat markers, then remove those markers. So those markers are now off the board. Then the Batwoman crew drew up another stick to the plan, which was unfortunate at this point that I wasn't able to score 2 copies of those at the end of the game, so it was a little stuck. At this point, it was a battle of activations. On the League of Assassins side, as you can see in her hand, Salandra does have the Daughter of the Demon card, which she'd used earlier to great effect to sort of keep parity in the suspect marker game. She had considered using it at this point to stop or slow down me removing suspects, but she thought that I could possibly use it in my favour to remove the suspects, which could stop her scoring her plot. So she chose not to. She also looked at trying to remove Agent 2 from the map to try and score the Lazarus Pit, but he is unfortunately just close enough to the Carrie Kelly miniature on the other side of that impassable wall to preclude that from happening. So instead, she decided to reduce my number of meaningful activations by moving to the other side of the truck with Polka Dot Man, popping down a suspect with Inspire, and shooting both the Arkham Guard 1 and 3 with split fire. She got 1 blood on each of them, which removed the Arkham Guard 3 from the map. Next, the lowly pepper spray cop actually raised his pepper spray in anger against the League of Assassins, taking a pot shot at League Acolyte 2. He managed to actually hit, despite the rain, and blinded the League Acolyte 2 for the rest of the round. At this point, the Bow Acolyte activated and moved to the mining truck to get to score both the plot and the Moth signal card towards the end of the turn, being an assassin near one of my suspects. Salandra also continued to shuffle through her deck by playing the Call an Ambulance resource to pop down yet another medical kit on the board. So now the GCPD detective, who has been reliably spitting out suspect markers all game, put out another 2 suspect markers towards the bottom of the board to keep my count of suspects up. That was with his Inspire and his basic action. Not only is Talia extremely livid that her son is in handcuffs in the back of a police wagon somewhere, she's also extremely cheeky. In an entire game of bluffing, she charged over to Agent 2, who had not moved from his place by the wall since turn 1, and decided to attack him. Like the idiot I am, I decided to defend myself with some efforting. Talia chose not to effort and scored enough hits to score the overdrive card. This was a mistake by myself and also a smart move by Salandra, because I had already activated Agent 2. I had no need to defend him. He wasn't offering me anything whatsoever. So that was another 2 points for Salandra, and she then played the Eradicate the Order as a resource to again continue shuffling through her deck. At this point, I took it upon myself to take a pass. Basically, I was trying to win a race with the suspect markers, and I thought it was best to activate last this turn. And then Salandra activated the League Acolyte with the Scimitar. Very simple activation, just moved around the wall to the other side, joining up with the rest of her crew. So as explained, I'm just on my suspect marker game at this point to try and score what I can. The reason I'm not activating Batwoman and careening across the board to try and punch something is because I can't get them off the streets without someone to arrest, because she would have to use her back claw to get there. So at this point, I just activate Arkham Guard 1 on the eastern side of the map, and he pops down a suspect to keep my numbers up. At this point, Salandra has all 8 suspects out, so there's not much she can do with her activations, and this is why I'm holding back on revealing the last few, to try and force her to have as few activations to fix that problem as possible. So Assassin 4 is the next to activate, and all he can do is retreat around the corner away from Carrie Kelly. At this point, we clarified something that I hadn't actually understood to this point, that Carrie Kelly was actually a millimeter away from the suspect marker rather than in base-to-base contact. So to remedy that, I had to do something drastic, and basically I measured and pre-measured and remeasured and pre-measured, and Batwoman was just 16 inches away from League Acolyte 1, the Scimitar guy. Salandra's kicking herself at this point because she could have run him away in multiple different ways, but this was just in range of my boss. So Batwoman takes the extra bonuses from the Batclaw aerial assault and pounds the League Acolyte, even with his combat bracers, knocks him out, scoring enough hits in order to activate the interrogation trait. Interrogation trait then allowed me to either put down a suspect marker on one of my models or move them by 4 inches. So I chose to move Carrie Kelly to the other side of the suspects that she could start her activation by revealing that one. Unfortunately, I couldn't arrest the League Acolyte one because, as I've mentioned before, I had to use my special on the Batclaw. At this point, the League Acolyte 2, with the knives, even though he was blind, staggered over to close enough to the suspect marker to ensure that the plot, which was holding back 4 of Solandra's points, would be fulfilled at the end of this turn. At this point, the final scores were becoming agonizingly close, and I thought I had this one mathed out that I could guarantee myself to score, stick to the plan. So Carrie Kelly, who had just been moved by Batwoman's interrogation trait, was able to use her handyman manipulate to remove the suspect that she was standing beside, and then move over to the second suspect, which was beside the other medical supplies marker. At this point, I went to reveal it with my normal manipulate action. Solandra played the do not deviate from the plan resource to try and block that, but I was able to play a spare, get them off the streets, to also block that resource, resulting in removing both of those suspects, leaving Solandra on 6 to my 8 with only 1 activation left. I could have chosen to do something else, which I will explain at the end of the game, which may have changed the outcome, but we'll get to that later. Over to Killer Moth next. Killer Moth didn't have a lot to do, but he did have the ace in the hole card. Solandra was able to play multiple threats on this activation, the last activation of the round, with 6 suspects out, guaranteeing those 3 points. He then backclawed up onto the roof for the crack and placed down yet another suspect. As the game drew to a close, we go to the final scoring. So this turn, the Die Hard, which was on Catwoman for the Batman crew, was able to score. Catwoman had scored her own character card, and at this point, the stick to the plan card was played in Phase 4, as the good guys had 8 suspects out, and the bad guys had 7. So that was an extra 8 points, leaving the Batman crew on 33. At this point, we then look over the League of Assassins, who had an absolute bumper turn. They were able to score that overdrive that we saw earlier in the turn, and the multiple threats of valuable commodities and Moth Signal all scored during Phase 4. Solandra was also able to put the 2 assassin trait models beside one of my suspects, and that meant that the We Are Among Us plot was scored with all of the cards thereunder, including the Fire Rises and Under Their Noses that had been scored in turns 2 and 3. This brought her total to an extremely surprisingly 33 points. So the game ended an entire draw, and it was probably one of the most interesting games that I've played, and big comeback from the League of Assassins after a strong push in the mid-game by the Batman crew. So the one thing I left out on Carrie Kelly's activation that I wanted to mention, that we've gone back and forth over what I could have done differently. So as you can see, there is a imminent threat marker near the big building. So if Carrie Kelly had chosen to remove said imminent threat marker instead of the one that she chose to remove second, she could have then removed the suspect marker that the 2 assassins were standing beside. Now, that would have cost me the 2 points from the stick to the plan objective, because I wouldn't have had most of those at the end of the turn, but it would have cost Solandra 4 points, so the final score would have been slightly different. I think we've gone back and forth on a number of small things that, had they gone differently or had we made different decisions throughout the game, would have changed the outcome. And I think that goes to show how close of a game it was and how interesting a game it was, because there are lots of things we both learned. There are lots of things we did not specifically wrong, but could have done slightly differently to benefit us. So it was a very enjoyable game, and I hope you enjoy watching it. So just as another thing to recap, this was the first time, as I mentioned, that we were playing with both this event and this deployment. We found it a little bit limiting. It was interesting at first, but then whenever we progressed through the game, it felt like it really sort of funneled us to a point. And I think both crews were hesitant to sort of get to that point whenever they were trying to do their suspect game in their deployment zone. The rain, I know it was unlikely that we would roll that would be raining heavily for all 4 turns, but it really, really reduced the potency of both crews, because both crews had brought guns or throwing weapons with them. So it probably came across as a very non-aggressive game, I would say. We both had ideas of causing more violence and more mayhem in the middle of the board, but the way that the cards came out on our hands, the way that our interactions went throughout the game, it sort of pushed us to the where we were trying to win, and the way to win in this case was to not play keep away, but sort of try and do what we could in our own spots before being forced into a choke point. So thank you for watching this game, folks. Salandra and I had a good time playing it. At times, both of us got triggered by things that happened throughout the game, but that's how Batman works. You overcome it, you push through, you keep scoring your points. We hope you've enjoyed following it along with us. Please let us know if there's things that you would have done differently. You can now see our hands at every stage, so you could choose to do different objectives, different resources at times. We do these videos for the love of the game. We've really enjoyed it so far. We just want to share our thought processes strategically and tactically pre-game, throughout the game, and intra-turn. If you want to see more of these, the easiest thing you need to do is to like and subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you get a notification when the next one comes up. You can also come and join us for a chat about tactics on the community-hosted Discord channel. It's the Arkham Rejects Discord channel. We'll leave a link in the description. There'll also be a link in the description to the Tabletop Simulator mod that we played this on, and to both lists. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you again next time, folks.